As the spring of 2026 unfolds, a shadow darker than the threat of foreign intervention looms over the Islamic Republic of Iran, a nation currently gripped by a dual crisis of unprecedented proportions. While the roar of American B-2 Spirit bombers and the precision strikes of Operation Epic Fury dominate the international headlines, a much more silent and arguably more lethal adversary is tightening its grip on the Iranian heartland. This enemy does not strike from the stratosphere. It rises from the parched earth and the empty reservoirs that once sustained a civilization. Iran is currently grappling with the most catastrophic drought in its recorded history, a systemic collapse of its water infrastructure that has brought the nation to the precipice of what experts are calling water bankruptcy. As of April 2026, the strategic reality for the leadership in Tehran has shifted dramatically. While the ruling elite reportedly seeks refuge in fortified underground bunkers to evade the coalition's bunker-busting GBU-57 munitions, they are finding that no amount of concrete can shield the regime from the environmental reckoning that has been decades in the making. The most vital resource for 88 million people is vanishing, and the consequences are proving more destabilizing than any foreign missile campaign. Across the country, dozens of massive dams, once symbols of the nation's industrial pride, are now little more than concrete monuments to a dying landscape. Major urban centers, including Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan, are currently facing a total depletion of their water reserves, forcing millions of citizens to rely on a precarious network of water tankers and emergency distribution points. In the heat of the Iranian spring, the sight of people waiting for hours in grueling lines just to fill a single plastic container has become the new national norm. Despite the government's attempts to frame the crisis as a direct result of foreign aggression, the data tells a far more complex and damning story of internal failure. The most stark evidence of this collapse can be found in Mashhad, Iran's second-largest city and a critical spiritual hub that hosts upwards of 20 million Shiite pilgrims annually. Today, this massive metropolis is effectively without a functional water supply. Historically, Mashhad relied on four primary reservoirs: the Dusti, Karveh, Ardark, and Toro dams. By late 2025, satellite analysis and ground reports confirmed a terrifying reality. Water levels had plummeted to below 3% of total capacity. Nasrallah Pejmanov, the chairman of the Iranian Parliamentary Commission, recently delivered a sobering assessment of the situation, noting that the water situation in Mashhad has reached a standstill. This paralysis has forced the city into a state of emergency, with authorities scrambling to extract what little remains from the surrounding aquifers. The Dusti Dam, situated near the Afghan border, was once the city's primary lifeline, but its utility has been neutralized by geopolitical shifts. Following the expansion of dam projects by the Taliban in Afghanistan, the inflow of water into Iran has decreased by a staggering 80%. In a desperate attempt to bridge the gap, the government put over 400 emergency wells into operation. However, after decades of aggressive overextraction, the groundwater table has retreated beyond reach, leaving these new wells dry almost as soon as they were drilled. The result is a humanitarian crisis of immense scale, where 4 million residents are now sustained by a rigid hourly distribution system. Neighborhoods receive water for only a fraction of the day, and the logistics of this system are failing under the pressure of the ongoing conflict. While the dams themselves were not the primary targets of the coalition strikes that began in February 2026, the destruction of Iran's electrical grid has rendered the water pumping and treatment facilities useless. Without the energy required to move water from the reservoirs to the taps, the pre-war crisis has mutated into a total system failure. Tanker fuel, once the last line of defense, is now scarce due to the war economy, and the distribution of aid is frequently blocked by the escalating chaos in the streets. The crisis in the capital is even more profound. Tehran, a sprawling metropolis of 14 million people, is currently counting down to its own day zero. In late 2025, the Center for Strategic and International Studies documented the status of the 5 main dams supplying the city: Lar, Latian, Talejan, Karach, and Mamlu. The findings were catastrophic. The Lar Dam, a cornerstone of the capital's water security, was reported to be at a mere 1% capacity. The remaining 4 reservoirs average between 5 and 11%, levels that are considered dead storage in hydrological terms. This uneven decline has disproportionately affected the southern, more impoverished neighborhoods of the city, where the taps ran dry months ago. The severity of the situation forced an unprecedented admission from President Pezeshkian, who warned that without significant rainfall, total water rationing would be the only option. However, his most shocking assertion was the proposal to relocate the national capital southward to the Makran coast. For a head of state to suggest the evacuation of a city of 15 million people is a clear indicator that the Iranian government views the current situation as irreversible. The war has only accelerated this timeline. Ongoing airstrikes have crippled the city's power infrastructure, turning what were once nightly water outages into a permanent state of dry pipes. Beneath the feet of Tehran's residents, a separate geological disaster is unfolding. The excessive extraction of groundwater has caused the city to sink by as much as 25 centimeters per year. This subsidence is not merely a theoretical concern. It is manifesting in the form of cracking highways, tilting buildings, and the destruction of underground utility lines. Scientists warn that this damage to the soil structure is irreversible. Since 1976, Tehran's water consumption has skyrocketed from 346 million cubic meters to over 1.2 billion today, while the city's growth has paved over 90% of its green spaces, preventing the natural replenishment of aquifers. In the historic city of Isfahan, the situation is equally grim. The Sayandehrud River, the ancient lifeblood of the region's culture and agriculture, has ceased to flow. The inflow to the Sayandehrud Dam has dropped to 6 cubic meters per second, while the city's minimum requirements remain at nearly 5 times that amount. The riverbed, which once flowed beneath the city's iconic Hayu and Siosepol bridges, is now a dusty expanse of cracked earth. The nearby Godvan Dam has added another layer of tragedy to the region. Due to poor placement near salt hills, the reservoir has been releasing highly saline water, which has decimated over 370,000 hectares of vital farmland. Further south, the intersection of water scarcity and active warfare has become literal. A coalition strike on a desalination plant on Keshem Island, the largest in the Persian Gulf, recently left 150,000 people without a drop of potable water. The Iranian regime has responded by framing this as a water war, launching retaliatory strikes against regional infrastructure in Bahrain and elsewhere. The threat from the West remains potent, with explicit warnings that critical desalination plants could become the next targets of high-altitude bombing runs. Meanwhile, in the northwest, Lake Urmia, formerly the largest saltwater lake in the Middle East, has effectively disappeared. Now a vast salt desert, the lake's demise has been fueled by a combination of climate change and the construction of dozens of dams on its feeder rivers. The resulting salt storms are now carrying toxic dust across the region, poisoning the remaining agricultural land and triggering a surge in respiratory illnesses among the local population. The social and economic fallout of this environmental collapse is staggering. To date, over 31,000 villages across Iran have been abandoned as agriculture becomes an impossible pursuit. This mass migration has driven millions of rural refugees into the outskirts of major cities, where they find no water and few jobs. These unplanned settlements have become powder kegs of social unrest, populated by a generation that has lost its livelihood to the drought and its hope to the regime's mismanagement. The government's insistence on blaming foreign powers is increasingly falling on deaf ears. While the war has undoubtedly exacerbated the logistics of water distribution, the fundamental causes of the crisis predate the conflict by decades. For 40 years, the regime has prioritized a policy of food self-sufficiency, doubling the area of irrigated land since 1979. However, this has come at the cost of the nation's future. Iran currently spends 90% of its total water resources on an agricultural sector that contributes only 12% to the national GDP. Water-intensive crops like rice and pistachios are grown in some of the most arid regions of the country using inefficient flood irrigation methods that allow half of the water to evaporate before it ever reaches the roots. Behind this unsustainable model stands the Hatam al-Anbiya construction headquarters, the powerful industrial wing of the Revolutionary Guards. Known by critics as the Water Mafia, this organization has overseen the construction of over 600 dams, many of which were built in hydrologically unsound locations solely for the purpose of generating profit for the security apparatus. This massive dam building spree, combined with the drilling of over 1 million wells, has depleted 70% of Iran's groundwater reserves. The traditional Persian Qanat system, a sustainable engineering marvel that provided water for millennia using only gravity, has been largely abandoned in favor of diesel-powered pumps. This shift has led to the vanishing of 130 billion cubic meters of groundwater and the sinking of over 70 planes across the country. Kaveh Madani, a world-renowned water expert and former official, has noted that while climate change is the fuel, mismanagement was the original fire that set the house ablaze. The fall of 2025 was the driest in 50 years, and the World Weather Attribution Network has stated that the severity of the current drought is a direct consequence of human-induced climate change. When this environmental collapse meets the reality of a war economy, the result is explosive. Inflation has surged past 52%, and the cost of basic food items is now beyond the reach of many citizens, largely because the domestic agricultural sector has withered. Since 2021, the frequency of water-related protests has increased dramatically. From the provinces of Khuzestan to the streets of Tehran and Hamadan, the chant of "We are thirsty" has become a rallying cry for a public that feels abandoned by its leaders. Analysis suggests a direct correlation between the areas suffering the most severe water shortages and the hubs of political resistance. The regime now faces a generation that is unimpressed by anti-Western rhetoric and unwilling to endure a future without basic necessities. The options available to the leadership are vanishingly thin. To reform the water sector would require challenging the financial interest of the Revolutionary Guards, a move that would jeopardize the regime's internal security. To raise the price of water to reflect its true value would likely trigger immediate and violent street protests. And to relocate the capital is a logistical impossibility while the country is under active aerial bombardment. In the final analysis, the greatest threat to the survival of the current Iranian administration may not be the advanced weaponry of the coalition. While bunker-busting bombs can degrade military capability and take out command centers, they cannot solve the problem of a nation that is quite literally running out of water. The strategic bankruptcy of Iran's water policy has arrived at the exact moment of its greatest external challenge. The taps are drying up for 88 million people, and as the reservoirs reach dead status, the social contract between the state and the people is dissolving. The war has accelerated this process, but it did not create the void. From the sinking streets of Tehran to the abandoned orchards of the south, the evidence of a civilization in retreat is everywhere. Iran is drawing from its environmental savings account at a rate that cannot be sustained, and that account is now empty. The regime remains hidden in its tunnels, but for the millions of citizens standing in line for a gallon of water, the true enemy is not in the sky. It is the silence of the pipes and the heat of the sun. The crisis is growing, the solutions are non-existent, and the water is running out. This is the reality of Iran in April 2026, a nation facing an existential reckoning where the final blow may not be a bomb, but a drought that has finally taken its revenge. As we look at the shifting landscape of the Middle East, it becomes clear that the most decisive factor in the fate of nations may no longer be the strength of their armies, but the security of their wells. We want to hear your perspective on this deepening crisis and how you believe the international community should respond to a humanitarian disaster of this scale. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. To stay informed on the most critical global developments and to access exclusive analysis from PPR Global, ensure you are subscribed to our channel and have enabled all notifications. Thank you for joining us for this report.